Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Who cashes in on online sports betting is a decision that is far from decided. Tribes are working on legal and political fights in a number of states to stake out their share. In many cases, the arguments are based in the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, under which tribes operate casinos. California, Colorado, Wisconsin, and Michigan all have different sports betting battles right now. We'll find out how tribal sports betting plans fit in right after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. The final day of the Special Chiefs meeting of the Assembly of First Nations was on Thursday, and there was continued pushback to the notion of a new pipeline to Canada's west coast and the lifting of a tanker ban along that coast. As Dan Karpenchuk reports, 3 federal cabinet ministers took the stage to address the chiefs.
The cabinet ministers included Rebecca Alty, Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, Mandy Galmasti of Indigenous Services, and Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne. They were there to push the Prime Minister's agenda of major nation-building projects, and they stressed that they needed First Nations as economic partners. The main issue that continued to dominate discussion is the likelihood of a lifting of the oil tanker ban on the West Coast to support a new pipeline. Eldon Yellowhorn is an Indigenous Studies expert at Simon Fraser University. He says Native leaders have good reason to fear a lifting of the tanker ban.
Driven by fears of an oil spill, the tanker ban, and for good reason. I mean, Exxon Valdez disaster in 1989 still has its mark on the land and the sea around Alaska. And there's very real fears here that something similar could happen. It could wipe out entire coastal communities and their livelihoods. So there's a real fear about that particular resolution.
The key minister helping to advance the major projects agenda was not present for the final day. He had run into trouble last week when he brushed off concerns from coastal First Nations after he failed to meet with them before the signing of the pipeline agreement with Alberta. He did eventually meet with those First Nations, but some have said they weren't satisfied with what they heard. Many chiefs say the proposals for developing resources are an attack on First Nations rights. Some, however, have expressed an openness to pipeline ownership. Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne told the meeting that Indigenous partnership was key to speeding up major projects, boosting economic growth, and strengthening Canada's position at home and abroad. For National Native News, I'm Dan Karpenchuk.
A Navajo children's television show is returning with a holiday special. Reporter Jill Freitas has more.
The Navajo Highway special is titled Yate Kishmish, which is Merry Christmas in Navajo. It's the show's first full holiday-themed episode. The creator of the series, filmmaker and musician Pete Sands, says the show teaches Navajo culture.
Parts of it is my childhood, and part of it is how I wish my childhood was. So it's a balance of both, and I think shining positivity on Indigenous cultures is important to do.
The series blends puppetry, storytelling, and Navajo humor, all set along the winding highways of the Navajo Nation. Sands says that a memory he had of a teacher using puppets to help children listen gave him the idea to use them in his show.
Seeing a teacher friend of mine who's trying to tell her first grade students to clean up, but they wouldn't listen to her. So she reached into her desk and she pulled out a hand puppet and started talking to her class in the puppet. And they listened to her, to the puppet actually. And this is like a light bulb went off in my head. Like, wait, there's something to this. Maybe I could use this.
The holiday episode highlights traditional winter teachings, including family gatherings, gratitude, and the meaning of giving. Season 2 of the series begins production next year. Sands says there will be new puppets and new locations, but says the heart of the show remains the same, teaching children simple Diné words and phrases through everyday scenes and conversations. The Navajo Highways Holiday Special and Season 1 is now streaming on the First Nations Experience, or FNX platform. I'm Jill Freitas.
And I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support by AARP, whose Family Caregiver Resource Guide is available to caregivers by calling 877-333-5885 or at aarp.org/caregiver-resources.
Support by Drummond Woodsum, a full-service law firm whose nationally recognized tribal nations practice provides services to tribal nations and their enterprises and to companies that do business with tribes across the country. More at dwmlaw.com.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Tribes in Colorado are challenging the state for the ability to operate online sports betting on tribal lands. A federal judge just dismissed one suit by the Southern Ute tribe and is moving forward with their fight. It's one of several legal battlegrounds where tribes are coming into conflict with the complex and evolving sports betting landscape. In California, a group of tribes is fighting private companies, specifically one called Kalshi, for what the tribe says is an infringement on their gaming rights. The company has an app that skirts the state's current ban on online betting. Today on our show, we'll speak with tribal gaming experts on the jurisdictional fights tribes are engaged in over online sports betting. We also want to hear from you today, our listeners. What does online sports betting look like in your community? You can join us with comments and questions. Just give us a call, 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Joining us now from our Albuquerque, New Mexico studio, we have Jason Giles. He is the executive director of the Indian Gaming Association. He is Muskogee. Jason, you've been on the show many times. Welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Joining us from Riverside County, California, is James Siva. He is the vice chairman and a citizen of the Morongo Band of Mission Indians. He is also the chairman of the California Nation's Indian Gaming Association. Vice Chairman Siva, you are also a frequent guest. Welcome back to NAC.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
And joining us from Norman, Oklahoma, is Gary Pitchlin. He is a professor of law at the University of Oklahoma. He is Choctaw. Gary, hello, and welcome to Native America Calling.
Hello, happy to be here.
It's wonderful to have all of you on the show today. Jason, I want to begin with you, and let's start with Colorado, where a federal judge ruled against the Southern Ute and Ute Mountain Tribes' effort to allow people to access tribal online sports betting, even if they aren't physically on tribal land. Now, this is an issue that is also being discussed in other states. Can you give us a roundup of how this is all developing?
Yes. Nationally, you really had a breakthrough in Florida when the Seminoles reached a new compact agreement with Governor DeSantis and offered sports betting in Florida as the sole provider of sports betting in Florida with the servers on Seminole Nation land. And in their compacts and working with the governor and through the legislature, they said, hey, if you're a citizen in Florida and you put these bets on the servers, which are on Indian lands, that will be deemed on Indian land. And that was a revolutionary, groundbreaking agreement that, frankly, around the world, there's a big question of where the bet is actually placed. Is it where it's originated? Is it where it's processed? Is it where it's paid out? But, the Seminoles and the governor reached the agreement that it is on Indian land because that is where the servers are. That's where the bet is processed. Now, to do that, they had to amend their compacts. Similarly, the tribes in Kansas used that model, and it's what folks are starting to refer to as the hub and spoke model. Now, in Colorado, you have the Southern Ute tribe and Ute Mountain Ute, who both have gaming compacts with the state. Interestingly, both those gaming compacts are in perpetuity. So if they were to want to add sports betting to that, they would need to negotiate an addendum with the state or something like that. At the time, Governor Polis, it doesn't sound when the voters legalized sports betting in Colorado in 2019. I don't know if they don't want to open up their compacts or if the governor's reluctant to, but they couldn't arrive at an agreement. And the Colorado tribes started offering sports betting, and the state came back and said, hey, you're going to have to remit the 10% tax on sports betting that the other sports books in the state pay. And, tribes, that's an infringement of sovereignty. Tribes are not taxed under this federal system, under the Constitution. And unfortunately, they lost their court case at the district level. And interestingly, the judge said that it's a legal question of where the bet is placed. Is it where the server is? Is it a person in Denver who originates it on his phone? Is that where the bet is placed? This particular federal judge in Colorado took the opinion that that the bet, if it's off reservation lands, IGRA does not apply. So that person in Denver betting on his phone at the Sky Mountain Ute sports book, the tribe's going to have to pay the tax on that.
Okay. Jason, this decision now in Colorado, then, is it a precedent? And tribes operating online sports betting efforts in other states, could they potentially be confronted with an issue here?
Well, yes. I know for a fact that in Wisconsin, they were looking at this model, again, trying to work something out with the governor. But also around the country, our tribes in Oklahoma, where Mr. Pitchlynn is, and then certainly the big prize in all of this eventually is what is California going to do with sports betting, with 40 million people in the state, fourth largest economy in the world, and, of course, a large population of tribes in California. Frankly, we at the Indian Gaming Association have been pushing for tribes to, start to look at the Florida model and the Kansas model, and we think that's where the future lies. I disagree with that Colorado District Court judge that, this is a legal question because we've already had precedent in Florida with the West Flagler decision where the D.C. Circuit Court said, hey, this is a fact-by-fact case. We need to look at what is happening on the ground. And in that particular case, emanating from Florida, they deemed the placement of the wager to occur on Indian lands where the server is. And we think that's what technology is demanding. That's where the future is going. And so tribes, I think it starts at the state level. You've got to get in there and talk to your governor and legislature and tell them what do we see as the future of commerce here. And tribes are not going to be fenced in, geo-fenced in, or blocked from interstate commerce because we are a federal sovereign under the Constitution, and we have a right to just as much commerce as anyone else in this country.
Okay. Now, Jason, the growth of online sports betting, it's just been astronomical just within the last few years. And recently, in an Indian Gaming Association webinar, panelists called online sports betting an existential threat to Indian gaming. Can you shed more light on that?
Yes. The existential threat actually emanates from what is being passed off as online sports betting. When DraftKings and FanDuel first came on and flooded the airwaves with, fantasy football and fantasy drafts, that morphed into sports books after the Supreme Court decision overturning PASPA, which allowed sports betting across states, the option of sports betting across the country. We all thought that meant, regulated sports books with, state regulation, tribal regulation. But this new form of online betting coming from these so-called prediction markets, parading around as commodities, that is the existential threat. And it's companies like Kalshi, Crypto.com, Robinhood, and now even DraftKings and FanDuel are getting into the so-called prediction markets. All of this is completely and utterly unregulated, and they're using a loophole in the Commodities Exchange Act, which was meant for farmers and agricultural products, to start offering sports betting. And, there's been a lot of it's been in the public a lot more now. There was just a 60 Minutes report on it this past weekend. that I encourage everyone to pull up on YouTube and check that out, because the fiction of all this is that it's a risk hedging operation that these companies are running, and maybe so, but the fact is they're making most of their money from putting sports bets up on there under the guise as a commodity contract.
Jason, give us a little bit more about, because this term prediction markets, unlike the company Kalshi, they describe themselves as a prediction market platform, not a sports betting website, right? And it sounds a little bit like semantics for somebody who sees, if you take a look at that website or Robinhood, and they're offering all these different prediction market choices or options. Is there an easy way, though, to explain to our listeners who might not be familiar with some of this nomenclature? What is the difference at this point between what they call a prediction market and a sports bet?
Yes. And this is an issue when this first came up in February that the CFTC, Commodities Futures and Trading Commission, again set up for agriculture and farmers, said that they were going to allow these platforms to offer these so-called contracts. So they might offer, will this hurricane make landfall on the continental U.S.? And they'll give you certain odds, 60% yes, 40% no. They're taking that type of risk hedging, but also applying it to a football game, which we're all familiar with. Will a certain running back score a touchdown in this game? Yes or no? Will the Dallas Cowboys win on Thursday night? Yes or no? So we can understand that maybe in a better way than you can at a sports book, which is a little more, it takes a little more expertise and familiarity if it's Dallas Cowboys -5 against the Washington Commanders. Most people get tripped up by the odds, or if there's just straight odds, if the Cowboys were -300 just to win the game, people aren't going to relate to that as much. What they're offering, so they say, is a yes or no proposition on games and on players on what they will do. Now, that's the fiction, because it really, at the end of the day, doesn't look any different than if you walked into a sports book.
Okay. We have to take a break. We're going to come back. We're going to continue this conversation. We're going to learn more about what's happening here with regard to sports betting and tribal gaming. Give us a call if you'd like to join us, 1-800-99-NATIVE. Tribal museums set the standard for comprehensive, accurate, and respectful portrayals of current and historical Native American life. They are now picking up the pieces after major cuts by the Trump administration. We'll find out what the promising trends and ominous threats are for tribal museums on the next Native America Calling.
The Indian Arts and Crafts Act protects authentic American Indian and Alaska Native artists and craftspeople and their art and craft work. Under the Act, it is illegal to market art or craft work misrepresented as American Indian, Indian, Native American, or Alaska Native made, or as the product of a particular Indian tribe. Reporting potential Act violations can be done at doi.gov/IACB or at 1-888-ART-FAKE. Support provided by Indian Arts and Crafts.
Listening to Native America Calling, we're looking at tribes and online sports betting today. We also want to hear from you. If you have a comment or a question about tribal online sports betting, you can join us with a comment or question. Just call 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Among our guests today, we have Jason Giles, the executive director of the Indian Gaming Association. He is in our Albuquerque studio. And Jason, we'll talk more about the legalities here with what is happening with regard to some of these companies' prediction market platforms and such. But first, I just want to ask you, tribal gaming continues to experience growth every year, generating nearly $44 billion last year. That was up $2 billion from 2023. What do you see as the potential of these non-tribal sports betting operations eating into that number?
That's the big question that we have right now. it's hard to see any of that data right now because, again, these guys have only been up and running for about 6 months. But, tribal gaming has continued to grow through the Great Recession, through COVID, and the numbers, and it's due to the tribal leadership of these tribes and the influence we've had on the gaming industry as a whole across the country. And I will say right now, tribal gaming and the commercial gaming folks are very concerned about the rise of these so-called prediction markets. Because if they're going to reduce everything to a yes or no, that can be anything in your daily life. It can be anything, look around you, and that will be the existential threat to tribal casinos. We already know that they are contemplating putting out so-called contracts on Powerball. Will the Powerball hit within the next 100 draws? They're thinking of doing it on slot wide area progressives. Will the Wheel of Fortune jackpot machine hit in the next 1,000 spins? And you would buy a contract for 1,000 spins. So it's gambling on gambling. It sounds ludicrous, but if you watch that 60 Minutes thing, this is what they believe the future is. And it's either all made up or none of it is. In Indian gaming right now and the commercial side, we tend to think it's all just a cash grab right now because this is all unregulated. They are exploiting a loophole in the agriculture sector to offer these ridiculous bets, which was, it comes down to that. What is the public policy of what they're doing?
I was looking at the Robinhood app earlier today, preparing for the show, and you can bet on how much snowfall will occur in certain cities, how much rainfall, hurricane. Yeah, it's just, it just.
You can bet on how long Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift will be married.
Yeah, and when she's going to get pregnant. That's another one you can bet. Yeah, okay. I want to read a disclosure here, before we get too far along in this conversation. We did reach out to the company Kalshi for comment today. We did not hear back from them by showtime. We did get a response from Robinhood, however, and they replied, Robinhood has great respect for the tribes and their sovereignty, and we do not believe these products interfere with or are in violation of that sovereignty. The company goes on to say their regulation is on the federal level. And with that, let's bring in our next guest, Vice Chairman James Siva with the Morongo Band of Mission Indians. And Vice Chairman, sports betting, it is not legal in California, but this company, Kalshi, is advertising that it is. How are they able to do that?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for letting me be here today. Yeah, and you laid it out right there. They are advertising that there is sports betting in California. They are advertising that there is online sports betting in all 50 states and all of their marketing material. But as Jason mentioned, when you ask them what they're doing, oh, this isn't sports betting. These are prediction contracts. See, we're just a trading platform. But in their marketing material, they have no problem calling it sports betting. So I think you can see the confusion is already starting there. They themselves, in their marketing material, admit that it's online sports betting. And I think Jason did an excellent job of, trying to put together the last 6 months, and this is the number one threat to tribal gaming currently. We have been working on this since January. We've seen a lot of different legal cases going through. I know we have a case coming out of California, and there's so many moving parts to this that it gets very complicated, and I feel like we've had to break it down into separate sectors where we have the kind of legal track we're working on. We're working on a public policy track, but now we really need to get out there into the public and provide this information, because I'm sure some of the viewers out there have very little clue of what we're talking about, and unfortunately, that's the reality of this offering. Is it's so brand new, people don't even understand what it actually is. They just see it as sports betting, and they're like, it's on the App Store now, it must be approved. So it's very complicated. The education process has been long and hard, but we stand ready to work on this issue.
Vice Chairman, have you had communications with any of these companies we're talking about today? And if so, what's been their response?
Yeah, so I was fortunate to take part in a Zoom call along with Jason and some other tribal leaders with the CEO, Tariq of Kalshi, laying out our concerns, laying out, our position that we see this as both a violation of tribes' gaming exclusivity and even further a violation of our sovereignty, which is, the fundamental principle that separates us and, creates us into the space that we are. And, he was on the surface very respectful of that argument. He feels that they have done their work on the federal side, working with the CFTC. But we feel that the CTFC itself has a misunderstanding of what these contracts actually are. As Jason mentioned, with the Commodity Exchange Act, strictly prohibits gaming contracts. The way Kalshi has constructed these through the self-certification process, which is another huge issue, that all of these contracts they're offering are Kalshi certifies them themselves. Now that they've been approved to offer them by CTFC, they just go through with no recourse. All of these things have led to such a lack of regulation and a misunderstanding of what these are. And, we've been out there talking about how these are illegal online sports betting. But on the flip side, we've also been trying to get people to understand the reasons why these aren't commodity contracts, why these aren't futures contracts, why they don't fit the fundamental definition of what those things are that the CTFC does have authority to regulate. These do not fit that. Therefore, the CTFC does not have the authority to regulate it. Therefore, this is illegal sports betting. It's kind of a dual-sided understanding of what they're offering, but it is fraught with such a lack of understanding out there. We've met with so many members of the House, of the Senate, staffers who have no idea what is at the heart of this issue. No idea that there's a difference between these contracts. No idea that they're online sports betting. Some of them don't even know that it's happening, which is terrifying. And I think it shows you the state that DC currently is in, with the uncertainty and level of chaos happening there. But here in California, online sports betting has been at the forefront of what we've been working on for the last 5 years. And so now our attention was already focused on that. And now this is just another new avenue that we see we need to defend, the industry we've created from nothing. The California economy, as Jason mentioned, is the fourth largest in the world. And California tribes represent roughly a tenth. We're the 10th largest industry in that state. Mm-hmm. So we are a massive part of that economy. And as far as gaming goes, California has over 73 tribes involved in gaming, 109 federally recognized tribes here, the largest of any state, one of the largest tribal populations of any state. We have built up the largest portion of the gaming industry in Indian country. Mm-hmm. So these companies, these FanDuels, these DraftKings are looking at this as the golden goose. They need California. They have to have California.
Vice Chairman, you say defend the industry. That's the goal here. I'm curious, how do you do that? And what are you ultimately hoping to accomplish with regard to these companies that are operating in California? Are you trying to shut them down? And if so, permanently? I mean, what's the end game here?
Yeah, the goal absolutely is to have these prediction markets called out for what they are and shut down. We're going about that in a number of different ways. I mentioned the public policy. I'm proud to mention that starting very soon, the Morongo Band of Mission Indians will be partnering with the Yahavitam Nation of Samoel, working on a public policy, and we'll be reaching out to other tribes for support in that effort, as well as groups like the Indian Gaming Association, like CNIGA, like OIGA, because we believe there's strength in numbers, but we do believe that it is time to put this out there in the public, to get this out there, because we've seen some success with these recent lawsuits. Earlier this week in Nevada, the judge overturned the original injunction that Kalshi had requested. These companies are so aggressive. They're out there suing state regulators before the state even has a chance to do anything, before there's a cease and desist letter sent. That's how aggressive these companies are. So we're glad that those lawsuits are happening and this public policy is happening, but we feel like we have to point out all of the signs that this is illegal and that a lot of these companies feel there is going to be a future in this new area. I think if you need any more signs of that, you look at the exit of FanDuel and DraftKings from the American Gaming Association. The gaming association for those companies, they left because they see value in these prediction markets. They are actively leaving the legalized online sports betting market in the state of Nevada because the Nevada Gaming Commission told them if you enter prediction markets, it will threaten your license here. And they said, that's okay. We will sacrifice that license. They see the revenue. They see it. They would not. These are billion-dollar corporations. They would not risk leaving both an already existing legalized market and potentially jeopardizing any efforts to come into a market where they work with us in California, where they, but they see that and there's enough for them to move into those areas. I feel like they have the confidence that these prediction markets aren't going anywhere soon.
And Vice Chairman, let's also talk about just the future of tribal online sports betting in California, regardless of whether or not you have these other companies involved, because voters in 2022 rejected 2 ballot initiatives to have online sports betting run by California tribes. Is that the end of it? What's going on there?
No, it's not the end of it. We are currently working on, what the future of sports betting looks like in California. And, we had, the failures of Prop 26 and 27. And, that became a very confusing time for both the public and for tribes in California because we had, the first initiative, which was a tribally backed initiative. And then we had the second initiative filed, which, while it tried to have the public relations spin as also a tribally backed initiative, it was a corporately funded, corporately written initiative that was, geared towards making sure that they had control of that industry. And so we had to shift tactics from passing the first initiative to making sure that, the second initiative was unsuccessful. And so that ultimately meant that both initiatives were unsuccessful, but we have never stopped talking about online sports betting. The complication here in California is the number of tribes we have and the fact that we're trying to do this together. We have, dedicated ourselves here in California to but to guarantee a benefit to all tribes here from gaming, regardless of your status, regardless whether you are, an operator in gaming or not. So from the very beginning, we started a revenue sharing trust fund where we, distribute funds to non-gaming tribes or even limited gaming tribes here in the state to try to make sure that, Indian gaming helps improve the lives of every tribe here in California. And with that kind of foundation, as we look at this new form of gaming, we're trying to keep that same mindset and make sure that we can benefit every individual tribe here in California while maintaining our principles, of exclusivity, of tribal-led, tribally driven, tribally owned. That's our goal, but it's very complicated to bring 109 tribes together. Even with CNIGA, we're very proud to have 56 members, and even working with that group where we can say we represent the majority of tribes here in the state, it's a complicated issue, but we are making great progress, and we look forward to bringing in a well-regulated online sports betting market here in California, because that's what we feel we bring to the gaming industry is we bring regulation, we bring safety, we bring a guarantee of a well-run operation. You look at the history of California, very little, if no action as far as any kind of, regulatory issues. And we're very proud of that fact, and we look forward to bringing that. But it will come on the tribe's terms, and that's the thing that we've tried to stress to these companies and these operators is that California tribes will be the operators in California, whatever that looks like in the future.
Vice Chairman, we mentioned earlier nationally, tribal gaming, $44 billion last year was generated. What about in California? Can you give us a breakdown roughly of what percentage of total gaming revenues in California, tribal gaming revenues, come from sports betting as opposed to the slots and the table games and everything else? I'm just curious about, where it's at right now, the sports betting in relation to all the other gaming options that tribal gaming customers have now.
Yeah. So, of the $44 billion you mentioned, California alone is roughly about $13 billion of that number. So California alone represents about 25% of the entire tribal gaming market. We're very proud of that fact. We've worked hard to build up this industry here, and looking at what the online sports betting markets could add to that, and the projections, I think that we would see that number increase quite drastically. But it comes down to who's in charge, who is the operator. Are the tribes maintaining the exclusive right to continue to be that, or are we sacrificing a portion of that and looking at partnering with some of these commercial entities? And I think that really drastically changes what the overall effect for the market here is in California. But our current gaming numbers, slots continue to be the majority of that, followed up by table games. But we do see in this market, and as we see across gaming overall, the non-gaming.
I'm sorry, we got to take a short break here, Vice Chairman, but we'll be right back. We'll continue this conversation.
All are welcome to National Tribal Museums Day, December 6th through December 12th. More info, including a list of participating tribal museums, at indian-affairs.org/Tribal Museums Day. The association supports this show.
Ready to expand your reach and inspire change? Kaufman & Associates crafts culturally grounded communication strategies for Native audiences. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
You're listening to Native America Calling. Still time if you'd like to join this conversation over tribal clashes with private online sports betting companies. Join us with a comment or question. Just call 1-800-996-2848. 1-800-996-2848. I know someone listening right now is concerned about this issue. You have questions with regard to the future of tribal gaming and online sports betting. So give us a call. We have people on the show today who can answer your questions. 1-800-99-NATIVE. I want to go back to Vice Chairman James Siva and allow him to finish his thoughts before we bring in our next guest, Gary Pitchlynn. And Vice Chairman Siva, before break, you mentioned that slots continue to be the lead driver of tribal gaming revenue, but you gave us a little bit more details in terms of some of these other games and other options as well. Please continue.
Oh, yes. I was just finishing up by saying we see a lot of the non-gaming amenities starting to, increase in revenue as well. So, whether that's restaurants or entertainment or retail, those kind of different aspects of a lot of the bigger resorts, we start to see those revenues increase as well, which is kind of the same kind of similarities you see with the overall gaming market. Those non-gaming amenities start to increase in revenue as well.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. 1-800-996-2848. You can join the conversation. Give us a call. And let's bring Gary Pitchlynn into our dialogue now. He joins us from Norman, Oklahoma, where he is a professor of law at OU, the University of Oklahoma. And Gary, we heard Jason earlier mention the Seminole Tribe of Florida and their success with online sports betting. And he mentioned a term that the tribe employs called hub and spoke. It's a model. Can you give us a little bit more background on what that term means, hub and spoke, and how unique it is?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The concept of hub and spoke revolves around the agreed understanding that it is the location at which the wager is received that will be accepted as the geographic event of a wager. In other words, someone from the panhandle of Florida might get on the web, place a wager at the Seminoles Hollywood Casino sports gaming app, and by agreement between the state of Florida and the Seminole tribe, they both deem that wager to have taken place on the Hollywood Casino floor. And they have the boundary of the state of Florida. Everything within the state's boundaries is fair game for that activity under that agreement. Similar, I think, in Kansas, and I think we'll, as Jason said or inferred, I think we'll see this pop up in a lot of other jurisdictions. It is a novel way to get there, and unfortunately, in Oklahoma, we've had several different bills introduced that have not gone anywhere, and I think there is still a significant enmity, shall I say, between the governor of Oklahoma and the tribes and certain legislators that support the governor's position on these things that have hindered any progress in that regard.
Well, let's talk more about Oklahoma, where you're located, and tribes who are lobbying now for legalization of online sports betting there. How successful would tribes be to have exclusive rights over online sports betting across Oklahoma?
Well, I think certainly it would be profitable for the tribes to offer this. Not all tribes are going to profit from this measurably. The tribes that have access to the larger demographics, for instance, those around Oklahoma City, those around Tulsa, and certainly those on the southern border that draw from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, those would all have significant income streams from sports wagering. But again, since most of the hub and spoke arrangements are contained within a state's borders, I don't know how successful that would be for the tribes in the South End. They would really be marketing to people that drive 30 to 45 minutes or an hour from the DFW area to their casinos. So that's a little bit different. Around Oklahoma City and Tulsa, I think it could be very useful. I don't know what kind of return the small tribes who are not closer to the population areas, whether they could actually justify the expense of getting into the business and operating it. But it's certainly something they should have the opportunity to decide.
Gary, I also want to ask you about taxation, because each state has its own compacts with tribes over sports betting. What do taxation numbers look like from state to state in terms of percentages?
Well, it's a real diverse collection of taxations and approach to taxation. And it's hard to compare from one state to the next, because in one state they might be taxing the gross revenues, they might be taxing net revenues. In another state, it's handled more like a sales tax or an excise tax or even an ad valorem tax. So the range of percentages are real diverse. I mean, I've seen as low as 4, 5, 6%, and I've seen as high as 51%. So it really depends upon what approach the state is going to take to taxing those events. And I think in the end, there are some states that probably could tax themselves right out of this business. And I think that's probably been a problem in the lobbying efforts to get sports gambling in Oklahoma, because I think the legislators and the governor himself had a little bigger-eyed vision of what that might look like and what kind of income they could obtain from sports wagering, without an understanding that there's a fairly slim margin of hold at the end of the day that would have to be divided among, the interest holders.
Let's talk more also about the prediction market platforms like Kalshi. And there are states like Maryland issuing cease and desist orders to these companies that can bypass state sports wagering laws. What do you think are the greater implications on the outcomes of these legal disputes between tribes and these predictive markets?
Well, I would suggest that ultimately it's not going to be the state litigation that resolves this issue. It's going to be a push on the federal level. And first of all, let me say this. I give it up to the folks that are invested and are fighting this fight, Kalshi and the others. They have identified a vacuum in federal law, and they're taking full advantage of it. It's one of those creative thinking efforts that have put them in this position. But now what they have to deal with is they have to deal with interpretations of federal law and potentially changes to the federal law and regulations. You know, the attempt to regulate commodities market is well over 100 years old. I think 1922 is when the Grains Futures Act was passed, and then followed, by the Commodities Exchange Act in 1936. So, the attempt to stabilize markets and industries, particularly agricultural industries, is a very old, long historic effort in this country, and it's only when the Dodd-Frank Act in 2010 amended the Commodities Exchange Act to include swaps that this little gray area here was created. Now, ultimately, arguing that these event contracts are derivatives trading, I think is a weakness, and I think that eventually it's going to come back to haunt them with a decision that they're not going to like. Mm-hmm. But whether it's because the Commodities Exchange Act amends their regulations and rules, or whether it's the result of Congress simply passing a new law that makes it very clear that these event contracts that involve sports events are clearly sports gambling and not commodities. It's hard to say which will come first, but I do think that down the road we're going to see that resolved, not to the benefit of Kalshi and the others.
Okay. You mentioned the credit swaps and the derivative markets, and it really makes also people just think about regular investors and people with their money. And, the economy has gotten in big trouble before with some of these derivative products, and you have to question what the potential could be with these prediction markets in terms of inexperienced investors and what kind of chaos and what kind of turmoil it could cause for people in their pocketbooks. Gary, you mentioned a vacuum in federal law, and we've talked about this on the show before, but sports betting, online betting, none of this was included back in the 80s when the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act was drafted. So what happens now in terms of that law and its future, and perhaps an update?
Well, I think sports wagering was at least inferred by the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act in that it discusses casino gaming, basically as all other forms of gaming, not included within Class 1 and Class 2. So I think you have to assume that by implication that means sports wagering as well, because we know at that point in time there was sports wagering in Nevada and New Jersey, maybe another jurisdiction or two. But what I think I would expect to see is that this argument that their activities under the Commodities and Exchange Act is preempting the field, I think is weak, because it clearly doesn't say that. And in fact, there is a part of the provision that basically makes clear that they're not trying to do a special rule. That's what it was. Special rule 7A2C says it reflects that there's an affirmative intent to preserve state laws governing whether particular conduct is lawful or unlawful. We know there's a long history of gambling being a state law issue and not federal law. You go all the way back to the Kennedy administration. One of the real threats that was presented to the Nevada gaming industry was the idea that the Kennedys had that gambling should be a federal law, regulated by federal law. And that stirred the legislature and the government in Nevada to really bump up their regulation of the industry in that state to avoid someone arguing that it wasn't sufficiently regulated. So I really think that what we're going to see is that the courts eventually are going to say that there is not a presumption of preemption here because it's not plainly stated about the provisions of the act itself, and that the intent will be to preserve gambling as a state issue to be resolved state to state. If that happens, then of course, and even without Kalshi losing the other side of the argument, it would require Kalshi and those like Kalshi to be licensed within every state.
And in the meantime, Kalshi and these other businesses, they're just going to continue with business as normal for what they consider normal.
And this, frankly, it sort of reminds me of some of what we had to do for the tribes, with the tribes in the 90s, when certain states like Oklahoma were reticent to negotiate in good faith with the tribes over Class 3 compacts. We had to develop some novel approaches to gaming to draw them back to the table, which eventually happened 2004 and 5. So, this is one of those creative efforts. Someone saw it and tagged onto it and had the resources to start this ball rolling. And it's going to take, I think it's going to require a joint lockstep effort between tribes and their states to oppose this, lobbying for congressional action and lobbying and litigating until there's a final answer.
All right. Thank you, Gary Pitchland, joining the show today. He is a professor of law at the University of Oklahoma. As we begin to wind down, I want to go back to Jason Giles in our Albuquerque studio. And Jason, I'd like to get your thoughts with regard to regulation in these predictive markets and the dangers potentially of a lack of regulation. And is there any model at all that we could possibly think about in terms of putting in place to regulate more effectively?
Oh, I'll just start by saying, and I think Professor Pitchland and James Siva would agree with me, tribal gaming is the most heavily regulated industry already in America. We've got the National Indian Gaming Commission, and then we have our tribal gaming commissions, and then we have whatever regulatory structure that was negotiated between the state and the tribe. So we are very well regulated. We stand upon generations now of tribal regulators that have done a great job in our industry. And that is what makes these prediction markets such a threat, is they are entirely unregulated right now. And just to wrap up 2 points that Professor Pitchland said, as James said, we've talked to Tariq Mansour, CEO of Kalshi. We've talked to Alex Kane, CEO of SportsTrade.com, Vlad Tenev from Robinhood, who Robinhood gave you that statement. These folks are extremely intelligent, smart, good people. We've talked to them and met them. And and as Professor Pitchell said, they've found a creative method, creative entrepreneurism to put their product out there. You know who was in the same position at one time in the 70s and 80s? Our tribal leaders in the Seminole tribe, Cabazon tribe, the folks that were doing progressive bingo on the reservation. And you know what happened then? The states reacted with force. The Arizona folks know that the governor there surrounded their reservation to strip out machines. And that's kind of where we are now. But tribes can relate to that, except we were regulated and we had the public policy decision and we met with states on their level and worked out agreements. Ultimately had to go to Congress and the Supreme Court to work out our agreements. You just don't flood the market with nonsense and get away with it. And tribes know that firsthand.
And with that, we have reached the end of our hour. So I want to thank our guests today, Jason Giles, Vice Chairman James Siva, and Gary Pitchland. Please join us next week for another lineup of conversations on indigenous issues and topics. And I want to give a shout out to our hardworking crew in Albuquerque, New Mexico, along with our parent company in Anchorage, Alaska, Koahnic Broadcast Corporation. They all make Native America Calling possible. Enjoy your weekend. I'm Sean Spruce. We'll talk again soon.
Support provided by Amerind. Amerind is 100% tribally owned and partners with tribes and their businesses to provide affordable commercial insurance coverage, protect tribal sovereignty, and strengthen Native American communities by helping to keep dollars in Indian country. Information about property, liability, commercial auto, and workers' comp available at Amerind.com. That's AMERIND.com.
The Association on American Indian Affairs invites all to Tribal Museums Day, December 6th through December 12th. Tribal museums may offer no-cost or reduced admission, art markets, and live cultural demonstrations. Tribal Museums Day honors diverse Native nations as the experts of their own cultures. You can find a map of tribal museums and more at indian-affairs.org/Tribal Museums Day. The association supports this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.